Okay, so as always, I like being on the lookout for interesting typing sessions. There's always so many things to look for and look at that you can take from it. In particular, the typing process, the style of typing, the questions being asked, how they're being asked. Sometimes even the type of the questioner, right? The kind of the style, the way that they ask, the speed that they ask, quick and concise questions, or is it broad and vague questions? And there's pros and cons to using either which way, right? Um, so there's always so many things you can get out of it that I think is just always great to do. So whenever I see some interesting typing sessions or something fun, I always love to showcase it because there's so much to get. So in this case, I wanted to jump into a typing session for well, you know what? Let me just show this. How about this? Let's do this. Bam. Okay. So this is an old typing session. Came across it a little while ago. Thought it was interesting for a lot of ways. This is Trey over here in the upper right corner. This is his channel. He's another socionist, an IEI. And you have Damon down here, who is an SLE in socionics, also a socionist, and so on. They're both tag teaming this typing session, which I think is pretty great. Two duels that know each other well. It's always nice to have a bit of a panel typing. That could be a very effective tool to use. And they're typing Simon, this guy over here, okay, who's coming in. A lot of interesting stuff. And I think right here off the bat, let me just move this. Right here off the bat, things get kind of interesting already. So let's just jump right into it. Here we go. So already it's been about 6 minutes in. They've been asking a few questions, just kind of starting to feel each other out and get somewhere. And we're drilling into really the answer to the first vague question. So here we go.
So I mean, if there's something that you talked about recently with one of your friends or something like that, if that helps recall something specific.
Um, doesn't is it would it normally have to be contentious matter or potentially I
And
don't know, um
He's trying to explain why he thinks of himself as quirky.
what's
He's trying to give a real example of that.
I guess I have some more, shall we say, controversial views on certain philosophical aspects, like and this is one thing I don't tend to be quite stubborn about. This is just going to come to my mind now. Is I don't think we have free will. So I think that's one area where, for me, I tend not to be so open-minded. It's almost like after years of having reflected upon the question, I don't. It's almost like it's a fact now. I can't stray from it. And when I've tried to tell friends about that opinion, or when I've tried to explain why I believe so, um, I don't get met with too much accord, shall we say.
people like
So
control.
people like control, precisely, and I've always said when I've tried to expand on why I think that is the case, I understand why well, what I presume to be the majority would say that we do have free will, because I think it's an important illusion to have. Um, it's but it's still an illusion nonetheless. So that's
All right. Okay. So right off the bat, my personal take, this is a little bit anecdotal. It's not definitive, but I almost heard that and just wanted to go, IEI, close the door, just forget it. Let's just walk out. We're done. And the reason I say that is because just from my own experience, the thing he goes to is thinking about free will, a very philosophical topic that he's apparently been thinking about for a long time. And this is the example he goes to demonstrate how he's quirky. This is the thing he mentions that he has conversations with friends that don't go over so well. That's what comes to mind. That deeply abstract philosophical thing. It's just like, that sounds like an IEI to me. It's so typical for them to spend so much time pondering such philosophical discussions. Okay. Again, that's not definitive 6 minutes into a conversation, of course, but it to me, it just kind of screams out something. Now, why would it might be IEI, not something else? Well, for starters, deeply abstract, right? I don't think that's hard to argue. Deeply abstract concept that you're thinking about, very philosophical. He mentions that after thinking about it for years, as if he's really been pondering this, working it out in his mind, debating it, trying to see the arguments, the weak spots, looking for it. And eventually he comes to a conclusion that now he just sees as fact. He can't really move on from it. That sounds like abstraction. So some sort of intuition going on there. One particular intuition, not bouncing around different ideas, but kind of one thing. So leaning towards NI combined with TI, thinking heavily on something, creating a structure, looking for the flaws, the inconsistencies, looking whether it doesn't work. Oh, but it does work. Now that I've created that system, I've created this consistency of thought. It's like fact, I can't undo that. There's just no way to do it. Challenge me on this. That sounds very much like NI with TI as a mobilized position, a nice theme of NI and TI going on there. Again, that's an initial thought. Just like, wow, this is super INFJ. Like,
that's just my take.
and it's interesting that Trey here, who is an IEI, also like has a smile on his face. Like he's just like right there, like, bro, me too. Like, I'm just, we're here. It's like, the IEI is just kind of like, they all light up over this.
I agree 100%.
There you go. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're just like, yeah, no, me too, bro.
I got a question on that. So you started off describing it as it's basically truth after reflecting on it so long, but at the end of your statement you said, but that's just my take. Why did you say that?
I guess I said it. I probably and a very important point you make there. I probably, in some sense, shouldn't have said it, but I think the reason I did say it is because I have a tendency often to, over the years, probably self-deprecate too much, to doubt myself too much, and to put down anything I say too much. So I think that's partly, I would say, more than anything, force of habit. Thanks for picking up on it, because I agree. Well, I would suggest that I probably shouldn't have said it at the end, but if that makes sense.
Right. So even though this thing is what you know as raw fact or raw truth, even if you self-deprecate, right, you're still, perspective is you're speaking truth. So it has nothing to do with you because the truth is outside of yourself. So my question is, do you feel that you're willing to compromise truth in order to soften the harshness of it, or are you attempting to do something else?
No, I definitely don't want to. I want the truth, and I want to explore the truth, and I want to demonstrate, if for lack of a better word, the truth. I don't want to soften it. I think it's, if you like, almost like a bad habit that I have of softening everything I say, because I'm afraid of taking a stance too much. I think that then will be jumped upon by others potentially and say, well, you said this, and this is clearly your stance, and I'm almost bringing myself to the center, to the moderate position too much. So yeah, I think it's partly force of habit.
How do those conversations go with your friends when you bring up things like free will? What is the dynamic of those conversations, and how do you manage yourself in them?
Now, something I like to point out in this interview session before he continues on is you should also be noticing the different style of the two typologists on here. It even reflects on their personality quite a bit, which I think is part of the reason why this particular interview is so interesting to me, because I feel like you're getting a snapshot of three different people, two people who are the same type, and another person who's like the dual, and you see the complete different way they interact. I mean, you can really hear it. When Trey asks questions in response, it's very soft. It's a lot of times very vague, these very general, very broad questions, which he sometimes is doing on purpose, to kind of get a sense of the guy. And sometimes it's not on purpose. He's actually genuinely trying to give an analysis and some feedback, but it's like he's still struggling to make a more direct statement. It's very broad, analysis of things. Common for like an IEI. Meanwhile, you have Damon down here who is an SLE, and listen to how he asks questions. And when he gives analysis, it's the total opposite. It's very concrete language. It's very direct, very to the point, and very exacting. Notice that his questions, he's very much drilling into exacting questions, trying to get very specific answers, and sometimes even trying to turn it into a binary answer. Like, look, it either is or it isn't, yes or no. What were you trying to do? Versus Trey, who's giving this more broad, open-ended, just kind of whatever sort of questions. Both have their merits. Both are useful at different stages of the game. But I think it's quite interesting and telling about their types just on how they go about doing it.
It fairly quickly turns, if not negative, it turns into fairly combative, all in good nature, I would say. No one's getting the knives out or anything to that extent. It's more that it's obviously, as Trey was alluding to, it's a very personal matter for everybody to feel like they have free will. It's important in that sense. So I think to deny them what they would perceive to be their freedom would be quite offensive to some people. But I'm very careful about whom I bring it up with, and close friends, even close friends, I would say it's still good natured, but I can sense beneath the surface that they're really not having it, and they're not happy about it as well, because of that sense that, oh, what if I don't actually have the freedom I think I have? But it always tends to end well enough, I think.
Right. Well, they're still your friends, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to get to here is that this is something you've put a lot of weight into and something you reflected on for years. It's not just some idle opinion of yours. So how do you manage yourself in those conversations? Do you tend to stick your ground, or you tend to say, let's drop the subject? What's your default position on this?
Right. Yeah. I definitely stick to my guns. So I stand my grounds. I think I get to a point eventually where I feel like they're not really understanding what I'm saying, or maybe I'm not explaining myself well, or I'm getting to a brick wall. And I try my best to not tell people what all the answers are. I try and get them to think for themselves, and not just be all didactic and say, oh, I found all the answers and here they are, and then shove them on people. It's more that this is how I came to such. Can you disprove what I'm saying? That's the first thing. Can you disprove it? And no one can disprove it. And I often repeat that. I say, I'm still yet to hear an argument in favor of free will, which actually holds any weight.
It's actually logical.
Yeah, which is actually and then on that basis, I think it then eventually it just gradually dissipates. The conversation just wears itself thin, and I think we all probably normally get to a point where I think we can't reach a conclusion as a group, if you like.
I think.
Okay. I even like how at times Trey kind of like jumps in and sort of helps Simon like answer the question. He's kind of like, it's almost like he's FEing a little bit. Like he's just kind of like, they're not quite jumping in, and it helps everything. Yeah, and it's not logical. It's like he's almost trying to help him out in the process. Whereas you can hear Damon just being quiet, letting him respond, and then he comes right back with a very direct, forceful question, looking for very specific kind of answers. I think they make a wonderful tag team. I'd love to see these guys back again. So, hey, if you guys are watching, please come back, baby, come back. All right. I think they would just be wonderful with this. Let me see where I want to go with this. I want to speed it up. It's an interesting interview. There's a lot of stuff in here, but I don't want this to be too long. So I'm going to jump ahead. Let's see where we go here. Hang on. There's another piece that's quite There's a funny piece, but we're gonna get
It's
past
cool.
that.
I wish I could do that.
Yeah, I think the point still stands in that because I don't know necessarily who or what I could
Ah,
be.
perfect. Okay, now we're talking. All right, let's scroll back slightly. This is a definitive philosophical kind of piece coming on here. So let's go back here. Let's try.
Disney film, or whether even you, I don't know, that sounds absolutely awful. But
Back a little more.
yeah, no, thanks for asking. It's all good now.
All right,
Yeah.
I've got it now.
All right.
Oh,
I was going
sorry.
to continue that line of questioning, but we're good.
What? Yeah, we'll go ahead and do this one, and then you can take over. So the question is, if you had to imagine someone that this could be a real person, or it could be, someone made up, but if you had to imagine someone that you really admire but know you could never be yourself, what would they look like?
Excellent question, by the way.
I think the reason I'm hesitating is because I don't know if this sounds really wanky and as though I'm sort of, I work for I work for Nike or something.
Go on.
Nike ad, but it almost feels as though there's nobody I haven't been in terms of having encountered that person, whether in a Disney film or whether even you, I don't know, that sounds absolutely awful. But
You mean you don't know what that person would look like?
I don't know what that person would look like because I think I have the capacity to be as much Adolf Hitler as Mahatma Gandhi or Princess Diana. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
And to that extent, anybody I've
But
assimilated.
I'm sure there's a lot of people that you admire that are a little bit closer to who you are already. Right? Like if I think of Mahatma Gandhi, I would say myself that I feel like I'm not Gandhi, right? But I would say that I'm probably closer to Gandhi than say Hitler.
I'd hope so.
Yeah. But having the ability and power to make things happen and to rally the people and all of those things, that's something that I do admire about Hitler, right? So just as an example, right? But the question just being, what kind of things would that person be good at? What kinds of things would you look at and say, man, that is really tough for me to do, but that right there that's cool. I wish I could do that.
Yeah, I think the point still stands in that because I don't know necessarily who or what I could become for both positive or negative reasons. I can't rule anything out necessarily in that sense. But what I would say to that is if we're asking the here and now, right this second, what things do I struggle with, and therefore what things do I associate with what of those things do I associate with somebody currently who doesn't struggle with those things? I would say it would have to be somebody who didn't lack self-confidence about, say, I guess, we may need to revisit this one if that's all right, because I'm struggling to come up with any particular individual.
So let me ask you this, and we can get back to this question. But my question is, do you really believe that you have the same capacity as becoming Hitler as you do Princess Diana and Gandhi? Do you really truly believe that?
I don't believe, given my, I would say, luck, I would say that I don't believe that I currently have the same capacity to become one versus the other on each side of the scale, if you like. But I'm just saying that I can't necessarily rule out becoming one or the other.
Why? What would it take to rule it out?
I don't think you could necessarily. I don't think you could.
Okay, so you're leaving the possibility open that you could, it would be a series of circumstances which could craft you into one or the other based on what you're exposed to.
And this is the crux of the free will argument that I was trying to get behind earlier, and it's precisely why it's potentially very controversial. People don't like.
I'm not even challenging the controversy. I'm
Okay.
trying to get to the root of
That's
where this stems, right? So the question is, if you know yourself, do you have a depiction of this is who I am and a sense of self, right? What your principles and your sense of identity is. Do you have that?
I don't have a sense of self because I don't think you can find the self. The self isn't a fixed thing. It's a dynamic, fluid concept. You don't ever pin it down. It's like you're trying to find a subject by making it into an object, which is an impossibility. So no, I don't have a sense of self in that sense.
All right, right there. That's what closed it for me.
That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, that's exactly what closed it for me. Yep.
Sorry.
I was juggling two types for a while, and you just went. Whoop.
That's right. Oh, that's right.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
Were you
just,
juggling two types as well?
There. Yeah, I have 2 types.
Yeah. Surprising 2 types, right?
Yeah, it was 2 types that I'm wrestling with, so I'll let Trey carry it away.
Yeah. So I was thinking.
Now pay attention to these analysis and the style in which their analysis comes to you, the way they talk about it and so on. That's also helpful.
Between ILE and IEI.
Right.
I feel like from the very get-go, you said a lot of things that would why did I say controversy? Would normally make someone think ILE, right? All this focus on novelty and on ideas and banter, it just seemed very ILE. It sounded like someone who really focused a lot on ideas and maybe even how they interact with other people and the effect they have, at the beginning at least. Is what it seemed like. But then as we went on, you kept talking about your position on things, and then you mentioned free will. And this is where I started to relate to you a lot, because I had that exact same point for myself. And I'm not sure if you know, I am an IEI myself, right?
Yeah.
So when I was talking to you about that, I was seeing a lot of the issues that I had to sort of create rationale for, like being able to come to the stance where I feel comfortable positioning myself over someone or negating their position, because in my eyes, I can see how time has led us to the same point. So I can see where we're all coming from, and it makes sense that we're all here. So how does it make sense for me to override you, right? And so I related to a lot of that. But as we kept going, some of the things that are just more so about your character and where you've come from were starting to present themselves, so that it got a little bit harder to differentiate with certain things. For example, you seem to have a little bit of anxiety around relationships, right? Whereas generally an IEI is going to have a really easy time recognizing or navigating relationships, right? And so I think that when I started to dig a little bit more, I started finding out that generally speaking, you know how people are feeling, and you know where they're coming from, and that's FI and that's NI. I mean, you seem to have a pretty good grasp on that, and you knew how to navigate those situations. It didn't sound like a struggle for you. Maybe just some of the confidence related issues that you kept mentioning might get in the way of that sometimes, right? But I think when I asked you about practical issues, your answers kind of left a little bit of ambiguity, right? So when we got into the end there and you really started diving deeper in the concept of self, it seemed pretty clear that you were definitely an IEI, right? I mean, for one, I feel like that's that whole, it's difficult being an IEI because you have to, that sense of practicality isn't there. It's about being logically correct, right? Does everything make sense? Does everything line up? And so sometimes the most practical things in the world are the most illogical, just in a framework sense, right? Some of the things that we might do seem like they make sense, but they're actually just relative, right? So I think that that presented itself a lot in what you were talking about. I think another aspect that I see with FI demonstrative is that people who have the demonstrative element, or like IEIs that have it in, as FI, those people generally tend to recognize really clearly how people instill their logic with values, right? And so what that does, in effect, is IEIs are usually more aware of that. And so when people make logical arguments, they kind of see that it's not logic, you know, and they're like, you're just, you know, you're partial to this, right? And so it's really easy for an IEI to subtract all of the emotion and all of the personal sense of self that someone put into their logic until there's nothing left and you're just purely logical, right? And it has nothing to do with the individual. And that is why you get to that point where it's really hard to define this. I mean, you're looking at things from clear, like such a distilled version of what it is, that it's kind of hard to see it from a subjective point of view anymore, right? Does that make sense?
It does.
Those were a lot of themes I think that came out that kept telling me IEI, but for a while there, it wasn't abundantly clear until you got to the end.
So,
and now notice the difference. Contrast that response to
my journey was different and unique, but I started off with ILE, and then I started thinking ILI, but I saw the heavy TI, and I was like, this guy, I think he values TI. So I started going back to ILE. Then I was like, okay, now he's starting to sound like an IEI. And when I started going, and I was like, okay, this is actually, yeah, the ILE is getting ruled out. Let me walk you through some of the observations that made the most sense, right? First off, you know, there's this desire to become more confident or capable, right? And it seems to be a very overarching goal for even people who don't, IEIs that don't suffer from, you know, anxiety, they still want to be more capable and confident. This is a general theme amongst IEIs, is the feeling of being more capable in the world. And this is a way that they compensate for their lack of TE, but also for their desire to have more SE in their life. They're more push, the more ability to get things done, be more practical, be more functional. This is a thing that they strive for quite a bit. Yet it's over very selective things. It's very particular, and it's not just a wide variety of being good at everything. It's usually very particular things for particular reasons, and those reasons are justified by introverted logic. So there's a system or a practicality behind why I have chosen these specific things to enhance my abilities or strengths in. What I didn't hear from you at all was any TE whatsoever. So there was no extroverted logic pretty much in anything you've said at all. So I knew that ILE was just not even a possibility. Neither was ILI, and it started getting ruled out. But I still wanted to probe a little bit and figure out and dig deep. And I was like, maybe ILI's there. He's just, you know, we haven't got to her. Maybe I asked bad questions, and I'm going to have to refine how I'm asking these questions. But there was some sense of FI, and I said, okay, I see the FI. There's definitely some FI here, especially when you were talking about relationships, bonds, and actions matching up with words and making sure that there's a congruency there. So there's some FE and FI. I said, okay, that doesn't really support ILI as much. There was also the big thing when it came to particular sense of self, right? And when an ILI would never dream of becoming something they deem as evil. And they would see that as an absolute incapable thing that could never happen, right? Because there's a very strong moral stance with those who are in the gamma quadrant. And it's, you're a piece of shit or you're not a piece of shit. And most of them would agree that Hitler was a piece of shit. And to say that both are likely outcomes for you based on the course is a surrendering of FI to a higher position, right? Something is taking precedent over it, and that was NI. And it was NI, and it was also TI. It's understanding how things come together and ultimately can affect the outcome. And you surrendered your concept of FI, your sense of self, to this greater whole, which you will see very often in IEIs and their personification of how they identify who they really are, right? They usually reach this point where there is no sense of self. And the answers were very abstract and meta. There was not a lot of concrete anything provide. Any questions were very difficult to find specifics. And, asking for specifics, it was very difficult. This is a very SE sensory thing. So that demonstrated a very low sensory preference, which to me was right off the bat. I was like, okay, this guy's heavy on NI. And I knew that. I was like, okay, there's lack of specifics, right? What kind of guy gets punched in the face once and continues to smoke a cigarette, gets punched in the face again, and reflects on why he's getting punched in the face? What kind of guy would do that? And I had to ask myself, what type out of all 16 types? That would be IEI. Why is this happening to me? I wonder what's really going through this guy. Here? Yeah, what got me here? What's going through this guy's mind? I wonder
what
if
got this guy here.
Yeah, exactly. Anybody else would have beat the shit out of this guy. But you're over here thinking, I'm like, okay, you got punched once and you just smoked a cigarette, and then you got punched again and you were reflecting on why this had happened. And I'm like, there's only one type that's going to do that. And that is the IEI, right? And there's very strong nuance in your FI, right? So it's obvious that you understand dynamics that I don't even comprehend. You explain situation. I'm like, wow, that's actually a really good observation when it comes to people how people interact with each other. I don't have good at FI at all, so it's very hard for me to pick up on those things. Where for you, it was like, yeah, that's obvious, or I can definitely draw conclusions from that situation. But there wasn't this high urge or preference or this strength or anything on it. It was like, I know this, but it's not really important. You always deferred off to what was more important. You're like, what's really important here? And you would go back to something else. It was like kind of a obvious, and this is what we call your demonstrative, right? It's just constant. All right, you're throwing it around, but you don't really value it. And so for you, it's like, everybody should already know this. It's kind of obvious. And yet everybody doesn't, but it feels that way. And you were saying, I can kind of pick up on what's going on without even talking to these people. Right? If I saw somebody yelling at somebody across the table and getting upset, I would straight up walk up to the person and, why are you upset? Like, what's got you bothered? What's the deal? Like, and for you, it's like, I can inference that it's going on. And I depicted that it was a third party in this. And I'm like, damn, that's actually pretty impressive. I wouldn't have done that. Right. So
good stuff. All right. So stop them there. So several takeaways. Again, the way they ask questions, the analysis that they give. You could even see Trey being an IEI. He's also very, very vague, often kind of like floating around, kind of looking for his point a little bit. And that's just common with IEIs. It's like they're just not as direct, get to it. Whereas when Damon is speaking, like everything is very to the point. He was even breaking down as to what he was seeing and how he was very analytically eliminating possibilities. It's not this, it couldn't be that. Well, this is gone. I'm seeing that. So that's still in the game, but this is not. And he was showing you how he was very much doing that. A much more analytical approach versus Trey's approach, which was a little bit more of like searching for more of like the general themes and the vibes that he was kind of getting. That doesn't mean he's typing by vibe. It just means that he was kind of feeling it out in this more holistic way. Really good dual tag team kind of going on here. I think it really complements each other great for this kind of typing session. Lots of good analysis that he points out for Simon here, being an IEI. I'm on board, having seen the whole thing myself. I'm on board with that being an IEI, as I was pretty much from the beginning. And mostly agree with the the analysis at the end. There was just a couple of details that I'm a little bit, but I kind of agree with it on the whole. I'm not entirely sure gammas would never see themselves as a piece of shit. But then again, I suppose that's a gamma might do so-called bad things from society's point of view, would say what you're doing is immoral or wrong in some way, but to the gamma, they may have a justification in their mind that says I'm doing this for this and this reason, which is in fact actually a good reason or just as legitimate a reason as anybody else or anything else. So maybe from that interpretation, a gamma would never really be would ever really see themselves as a piece of shit. That's kind of my thought on that. But nonetheless, I get the point. Anyway, cool interview, lots to take in here. As I said, the style, everything. Damon, Trey, I hope you guys come back, man. This was great. Good stuff. Good typing session. I like the analysis and everything else. Yeah, pretty much. If you want to see the check out this, check out the video. I'll leave the links in there. And you can kind of see the full thing for yourselves. So that's all I got to say on it. Leave your comments, like, subscribe. Let me know what you think as always.